What if God called the sought-less person you'd ever expect? Not a polished preacher, not a powerful politician, not even someone with a fancy title or a theological degree. What if he picked a simple shepherd, a dirt under the fingernails farmer, tending sycamore trees far from the centers of power, far from the spotlight? This isn't a hypothetical. This is the story of Amos. His days were predictable: sheep, fields, the rhythm of the seasons. He wasn't like Jeremiah, born into a priestly family. He wasn't like Isaiah, advising kings. He was an outsider, an ordinary man living an ordinary life. But God saw something no one else did. God saw a voice that would not be silenced. At this time, Israel was booming. Think economic prosperity. Think glittering cities. Think overflowing temples. King Jeroboam II had ushered in an era of unprecedented wealth. Palaces were opulent. Merchants thrived. The surface looked perfect, didn't it? But scratch that surface, and you'd find a festering wound. Beneath the gold, there was injustice. Beneath the grand worship, there was hypocrisy. The rich crushed the poor. Justice was a commodity, true faith, replaced by empty, meaningless rituals. It was into this shimmering facade of false godliness that God hurled Amos. No angelic announcements, no blazing chariots, no dramatic visions to kick things off. Just a firm, irresistible call, and Amos. He didn't hesitate. He didn't run like Jonah. He didn't make excuses. He simply went. He left his quiet life, his familiar fields, and walked straight into the lion's den of Israel, the northern kingdom. Think about this. God deliberately chose an outsider. Not someone beholden to the corrupt system. Not someone with vested interests. He chose a man who would speak without fear, without compromise. His choice was a message in itself. God doesn't care about your social status. He doesn't care about your credentials. He cares about a heart willing to obey, a voice willing to carry his truth. So, Amos arrived in Israel. No status, no support, no guarantee of safety. He had only one weapon, the burning truth of God. And that, my friend, is something no one can ever truly silence. Are you waiting for a spectacular sign before you answer God's call? Are you convinced you're too ordinary, too insignificant? Or are you willing to step out, just as you are, and carry his truth where he sends you, no matter how uncomfortable? Imagine a nation on top of the world. Power, prestige, unprecedented wealth. That was Israel under Jeroboam II. Cities buzzed with commerce. Palaces gleamed. The elite feasted on luxurious banquets. From a human perspective, it was a golden age. Perfect, right? Wrong. So profoundly wrong, because God sees past the veneer. He sees the ugly truth hidden beneath the glittering surface. Behind every sumptuous feast, there was a starving family. Behind every grand mansion, a land snatched from the poor. Judges accepted bribes, twisting justice into a grotesque mockery. Merchants cheated with false scales, robbing honest folk blind. And the religious leaders, they turned a cynical eye to it all, preferring their comfort to God's commandments. Do you see the pattern? It's not just ancient history, it is a mirror. The name of God was invoked, but it was hollow. People flocked to the sanctuaries, offered their sacrifices, sang their praises. But their lives, devoid of obedience. Lacking fear of God, empty of compassion for their neighbor. They performed the rituals, but they lived without righteousness. They had perfected the art of religious performance while their souls grew cold and hard. And into this charade stepped Amos, a foreigner, from an insignificant village, pointing his finger at the powerful, at the elite, at the religious establishment, and declaring, "You are wrong. God is watching, and he sees everything. He had no army, no allies, no political power. Just words, but these weren't just words, they were daggers, each one forged in divine fire. Amos exposed the dishonest merchants, the corrupt judges, the hypocritical priests. He ripped back the curtain on the nobles' lavish lifestyles, built on the backs of the exploited. His message wasn't about individual sins alone. It was about a sound system front of injustice. Israel had become a hypocritical nation, convinced of its untouchable status because of its covenant with God. They thought their chosen status was a free pass, but they had abandoned justice. They had forsaken righteousness. Amos's message was brutally clear. God was not impressed by their wealth. He did not accept their empty worship, and he would not tolerate the oppression of the needy. Judgment was coming, and there would be no escape. Do you ever confuse outward success or religious activity with true spiritual health? Do you see the suffering around you, or are you too comfortable in your own golden cage? Where in your life or in our society does the glittering surface hide a dark, unspoken injustice? It is time to ask yourself, what truth are God ignoring? Amos didn't mince words. He didn't soften his message. He didn't care about popularity. His voice echoed through the streets, the squares, even the sacred sanctuaries, carrying a truth no one wanted to hear. He spoke like thunder, announcing God's unwavering judgment with raw, uncompromising conviction. He started by condemning the surrounding nations, Damascus, Gaza, Tyre. Israel cheered. Of course, those are our enemies. They deserve judgment. It felt good to hear God would punish them, but then Amos did something that sent a chill down their spines. He turned his denunciation towards Judah, their sister kingdom. And finally, he pointed his finger directly at Israel. They, the chosen people, untouchable by divine threat, suddenly faced a prophet declaring their doom. Amos made it crystal clear. Israel's election was not a get out of jail. In fact, it meant a greater tight responsibility. God had led them out of Egypt, guided them, blessed them. But now, because of their rampant injustice and blatant idolatry, he would bring judgment. Amos's words were a direct blow to national pride, a gut punch to their self-righteousness. He tore apart the arrogance of their leaders, the exploitation of the poor, the corruption of the judges, the falsehood of the priests. And here's the kicker. He declared that God rejected their sacrifices. He despised their hymns. Why? Because these acts of worship were stained with injustice. Their worship was a farce, a hollow, hypocritical theater covering up a rotten system. Think about that, God saying, I hate your religious gatherings. Can you even fathom it? Who was this nobody, this outsider, this foreigner, to speak like this? Who gave Sot the authority to criticize their customs, their leadership? He wasn't a priest. He didn't come from a prophetic lineage. He had no prominent position. But Amos didn't need human credentials. He didn't speak for himself. His authority came from God himself. And so, even as they recoiled, even as they rejected him, he pressed on. He knew his message was harsh, but he also knew it was true. And often, my friend, the truth is the last thing people want to hear. He exposed the hypocrisy of Israel's rich and powerful with words as sharp as a blade. He confronted the nobles living in ivory houses, the unscrupulous merchants, the corrupt judges, even the priests who profited from the people's faith. He didn't just condemn individual sins, he indicted an entire system of oppression. Israel's rich had turned prosperity into an idol. Their homes were grand, their furniture exquisite, their banquets overflowing. But while they reveled, the poor went hungry. While they slept in soft beds, the humble were evicted. The courts were bought, merchants cheated on their scales. Judges accepted bribes, peasants were exploited. forced to sell their goods at unfair prices. What should have been a land of blessing had become a cesspool of greed. But the worst offense, the false religiosity. They continued their rituals, their festivals, as if God was pleased with empty gestures. They sang praises, but their hearts were miles from justice. They went to the temple, then left to continue exploiting the weakest. For Amos, this was an affront to God's very character. He proclaimed it thunderously. I despise your religious feasts. I cannot stand your assemblies. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Amos 5:21-24. God didn't want sacrifices or songs if they weren't accompanied by justice and righteousness. True worship wasn't in the rituals. It was in an upright heart and a life that reflected divine character. The powerful felt threatened. How dared this prophet challenge them, condemn their elite customs? But Amos didn't back down. He knew God's judgment was near. He knew the false security of wealth and power would save no one. Do you truly believe your actions matter more than your rituals? Is your worship connected to how you treat the marginalized, the exploited, the least among us? Or are you too engaged in a performance, hoping God won't notice the disconnect? It is time to ask yourself, what would God say about sought your to worship today? Amos didn't just speak. God showed him terrifying visions, frightening images that laid bare Israel's future, a future of inevitable judgment. Each vision was a warning, a harbinger of the destruction barreling towards them. And yet, they refused to listen. First, a plague of locusts. He saw them, a consuming tide, devouring everything in their path. For an agricultural people, this meant famine, despair, death. Amos was so shattered by the sight, he cried out, "Sovereign Lord, forgive. How can Jacob survive? He is so small." And in his profound compassion, God relented. The warning had been delivered. Then came the second vision, a burning fire, consuming the land, drying up even the deepest seas. Not just any fire. This was total destruction, something utterly beyond human control. Again, Amos interceded, begging God to restrain his anger. And again, God held back. But divine patience, my friend, has its limits. Now, the third vision. This one was different. God showed Amos a Zontlum line. It is a tool masons use to check if a wall is perfectly straight, perfectly aligned. In the vision, God was holding this plumb line against a wall that represented Israel. It was a test. Was the nation still aligned with justice? With righteousness? The answer was chillingly clear. Israel was crooked, bent beyond repair. This time, God would not turn back. And then, the most devastating vision of all, Amos saw a basket of ripe fruit. At first glance, it seems positive, doesn't it? Abundance. But the meaning was dark, chilling. Ripe fruit is at the very end of its cycle. It's ready for harvest. Just like Israel, the nation had reached the absolute limit of its corruption. The harvest of divine judgment was ready. The time for repentance. It had passed. These visions were impossible to ignore. But instead of listening, instead of changing their ways, the leaders of Israel hardened their hearts even more. They saw Amos as an agitator, an inconvenient prophet hindering their interests. With each vision, God was screaming, "Judgment will come, and no one will be able to stop it." Yet Israel believed nothing could happen to them. After all, they were the chosen people. They had the temple, they had the sacrifices, they had the history of past deliverances. They thought God would never allow their destruction, but they were terribly, catastrophically mistaken. The clock of judgment was ticking, and Amos knew there was no turning back. What are the plumb lines in your life? What are the divine tests, the clear indicators God is showing you that you are out of alignment? Are you listening to his warnings, or are you hardening your heart, convinced you are chosen and immune? Don't wait until the fruit is ripe. The time to align is now. Not everyone stayed silent in the face of Amos's relentless words. His denunciations were shaking the very foundations of the system. Religious and political leaders began to see him as a direct threat. And one man, in particular, stepped forward, Amaziah, the chief priest of Bethel. Bethel, a royal sanctuary. In theory, a place for the worship of God. In reality, a hub of idolatry and falsehood. Amaziah was the embodiment of institutionalized religion, corrupted by power and politics. He didn't want to hear messages that challenged the status quo. For him, religion's role was to support the king, maintain order, and reinforce the comforting lie that Israel was special, protected, untouchable. But Amos was saying the exact opposite. God was fought not on their side. God was against them. The situation became unsustainable. Amaziah went straight to King Jeroboam II and lodged a formal complaint. Amos is conspiring against you in the midst of the house of Israel. The land cannot bear all his words. Amos 7:10. According to Amaziah, Amos wasn't just an inconvenient prophet. He was a political agitator, a rebel threatening the kingdom's stability. With this accusation, Amaziah tried to turn Amos's prophecy into a crime against the state. If he could convince the king that Amos was a traitor, he could silence him once and for all. But Amaziah didn't stop there. After speaking with the king, he confronted Amos directly. Arrogantly, dismissively, he ordered him to leave. Go away, you seer. Flee to the land of Judah. Go and earn your living there and prophesy there. But never again prophesy at Bethel, because this is the king's sanctuary and the temple of the kingdom. Amos 7:12-13. Amaziah treated Amos like a mercenary of faith, a prophet for hire, just another mouthpiece peddling comfortable lies. He wanted to expel him, send him back to his obscure homeland, far from Israel's powerful elite. But Amos was not intimidated, not one bit. He looked Amaziah dead in the eye and replied, firmly, I am neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I am a shepherd and a grower of sycamore figs. But the Lord took me from tending the flock and said to me, Go, prophesy to my people Israel. Amos 7:14-15. With that answer, Amos cut through the noise. He made it clear he wasn't a professional prophet. He wasn't doing this for self-interest, for fame, or for money. He had not chosen this mission. God had chosen Santem side. And therefore, no threat, no accusation, no power play would make him back down. Then Amos did something even bolder. He prophesied directly against Amaziah. He declared that Amaziah's family would be destroyed. His wife would become a prostitute. His children would die by the sword. And he himself would be taken into exile. For Amaziah, this was a humiliating, terrifying condemnation. Amaziah tried to silence Amos. But in the end, it was Amos who had the last, devastating word. His warning was not in vain. The fate of Israel was sealed. When you speak truth to power, do you face resistance? Do people try to dismiss you, silence you, or label you? Where are the Amaziahs in your life, or in our world, who prioritize comfort and control over uncomfortable truth? Are you willing to stand like Amos, even when the system fights back, knowing your authority comes from God alone? If one phrase could capture the heart of Amos's message, it would be this: But let justice roll on like a river, and righteousness like a never-failing stream. Amos 5:24. For Amos, there was no true worship of God without justice. No sacrifice, no praise, no ritual, no matter how elaborate, could ever replace an upright heart and a righteous character. But Israel had turned its back on this fundamental principle. They frequented the temples, they offered their offerings, they participated in their religious festivals. It was all an illusion. They believed their prosperity was a sign of God's blessing. A cosmic thumbs up. But Amos ripped that illusion apart, revealing that their wealth was built on the brutal exploitation of the poor. Religion had become a grotesque theater, where the powerful pretended holiness while crushing the needy underfoot. Amos denounced this hypocrisy without a shred of hesitation. He pointed out the merchants who falsified weights and measures, stealing from customers. He accused the judges who accepted bribes, perverting justice, the nobles who accumulated vast wealth while peasants starved. And above all, he made it clear, God did not tolerate this. The Lord was not on the side of the oppressors, but of the oppressed. True faith was not demonstrated in beautiful words or sophisticated ceremonies. It was demonstrated in the way they treated others. Amos cried out for a genuine transformation. Seek good, not evil, that you may live. Then the Lord God Almighty will be with you, just as you say He is. Amos 5:14. It was a desperate call to repentance, but also a stark warning. If the people did not change their ways, judgment would be inevitable. The problem, Amos's message was not welcome. The rich refused to give up their privileges. The religious leaders refused to admit they were wrong. The entire nation had convinced itself that because they were chosen, they were immune from divine reckoning. But Amos showed them they were fatally mistaken. He used chilling images to describe their coming future. The oppressors would be torn from their luxurious homes, dragged into captivity. Those who trusted in their wealth would not escape. The day of the Lord, which many expected as a time of glory, would actually be a day of utter darkness and destruction. His message was unmistakable. Without justice, there is no peace. Without righteousness, there is no divine protection. And worst of all, when the tragedy arrived, it would be too late to turn back. The clock was ticking. God's justice was about to manifest itself. Amos's words were ignored. The rich continued their exploitation. The priests continued to cover corruption with empty rituals. The king maintained his policy of expansion and luxury, as if nothing could shake Israel. But Amos knew God's judgment was certain. He not only warned about injustice, he announced the nation's inevitable destiny. Sat. For Israel, this idea was unthinkable. They were the chosen people, protected by the covenant. They had the temple, the promises to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. How could they be destroyed? How could they be delivered into the hands of foreign nations? But Amos left no room for doubt. He declared that Israel would be taken captive by a powerful enemy. Their land devastated. The days are coming, declares the sovereign Lord, when I will send a famine through the land, not a famine of food or a thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. Amos 8:11. People would stagger from sea to sea, searching for the word of the Lord, but they would not find it. The punishment would not only be physical but spiritual. God would be silent. The people who had rejected his voice would now cry out for guidance, but they would find none. It would be too late. Amos described a scenario of horror. Luxurious houses destroyed, fields abandoned, markets empty. The powerful dragged like prisoners. He mentioned a specific enemy, a great nation from the north. History reveals it, Assyria. Decades later, in 722 BC, Amos's prophecy was fulfilled with terrifying accuracy. The Assyrian Empire invaded, plundered, exiled thousands. The kingdom of Israel, once invincible, was wiped off the map. The most tragic part: it wasn't because Israel was militarily weak or Assyria too powerful. It was because God himself had withdrawn his protection. Exile was not just a historical event. It was a divine judgment. They chose to ignore the warning. Now, they face the consequences. Are you truly listening to God's voice in your life, Or are you hoping he'll remain silent on the uncomfortable truths? Are you so convinced of your safety that you ignore the spiritual hunger within you, or the warnings he sends? What famine of hearing are you currently experiencing? And what will it cost you if you don't break the silence? God's judgment was certain. Israel would face exile. Its lands would be devastated, its people scattered among the nations. Amos left no doubt. Destruction was the consequence of their injustice, idolatry, and arrogance. But here's the profound twist. In the midst of this storm of condemnation, God left a promise. He never destroys without a purpose. He never judges without leaving a way for restoration. After so many warnings about punishment, Amos brought an unexpected word. There would be hope. In that day I will restore David's fallen shelter. I will repair its broken places, restore its ruins, and build it as it used to be. Amos 9:11. Think about that. The very same God who would allow Israel's destruction fought to rebuild it. But not like before. He wouldn't simply restore the corrupt palaces or the hypocritical temples. He would restore the citizen side of what Israel was meant to be. A just, upright people, truly faithful to the Lord. The image Amos used was incredibly powerful. David's fallen shelter. It represented just and God, fearing government, righteous leadership. Something Israel had utterly lost. Now God himself would erect a new kingdom built on the foundations of justice and righteousness. He described a time of abundance, a real prosperity, unlike the false one Israel had created. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when the reaper will be overtaken by the plowman, and the planter by the one treading grapes. New wine will drip from the mountains and flow from all the hills. Amos 9:13. Here, Amos painted a scenario of total renewal. The harvests would be so abundant that farmers wouldn't even finish gathering one crop before it was time to plant the next. Fields would flourish. Vineyards would produce an overwhelming abundance. The land, once ravaged by judgment, would return to being a place of blessing. But this promise wouldn't be fulfilled immediately. The exile would come first, the pain, the humiliation, the separation. The people would feel the crushing weight of their sins. Yet, God's final word would not be destruction, but redemption. Centuries later, descendants of the exiles returned. Jerusalem was rebuilt. The temple was rebuilt. But Amos's prophecy pointed far beyond that. He wasn't just talking about a physical restoration. He pointed to something infinitely greater, an eternal kingdom established by God himself. In the New Testament, the apostles saw the definitive fulfillment of this promise in Jesus Christ. He came as the descendant of David, the one who would restore the true kingdom of God, not based on wealth, not based on military power, but based on perfect justice and unending righteousness. Amos's message ended with hope. Judgment would come, yes, but it would not be the end. God was still writing the story. And for those who chose justice, mercy, and obedience, the future would be glorious. Even after profound failure, do you believe in the possibility of a new beginning? A radical restoration from God? Are you looking for a superficial fix? Or are you longing for a transformation that rebuilds the very essence of who you are, or who we are called to be? What broken places in your life, or in our world, are waiting for God's ultimate repair? Amos's voice fell silent centuries ago, yet his message has never stopped echoing. He was an unlikely prophet, a simple shepherd. No priestly lineage, no status, no formal religious training. Yet God used him to confront kings, priests, and the entire elite of Israel. He didn't seek fame. He didn't try to please anyone. He didn't mince words. He just obeyed. His mission was brutal. He was ridiculed, rejected, and threatened. His warnings were ignored. And Israel, tragically, walked straight down the path to destruction. But even though his generation refused to listen, his words were preserved. His small book became one of the foundational pillars of biblical prophecy, an eternal cry against oppression, an unwavering condemnation of religious hypocrisy. Amos's impact was not limited to his time. His denunciations about injustice are shockingly relevant today. He showed us, clearly, that God is not impressed with empty rituals or beautiful words. What he truly requires is justice, integrity, and profound compassion for the weakest among us. True worship isn't found in songs or ceremonies. It's found in the way we treat each other. Throughout the centuries, prophets, leaders, and reformers have turned to Amos's words as a blazing reference point. Jesus himself echoed Amos's teaching when he confronted the Pharisees for their hypocrisy, for their outward piety masking inward corruption. The apostles reaffirmed the radical message that God desires a holy people, not just in rites, but in authentic character. And even today, his message continues to be a piercing challenge for societies that place power, profit, and personal comfort above justice. If there is one thing we learn from Amos, it is this: God does not ignore the cry of the oppressed. He sees the exploited. He sees the marginalized. He sees those who suffer in silence. He is not on the side of the powerful who perpetuate injustice, but on the side of those who seek truth and righteousness. His judgment may be delayed, yes, but it always comes, and his restoration is absolutely certain for those who turn to him. The story of Amos reminds us that no matter our origin, no matter our status, no matter how unqualified we feel, God can call us to be his voice in the midst of darkness. Like Amos, we may be called to speak truths that no one wants to hear. We may be rejected, we may be ridiculed, we may be fought against, but if God sends us, we must obey, because his word never, ever returns empty. And just as with Amos, we might not see the immediate fruits, but the truth, my friend, always prevails. God's judgment is real, but his mercy, it is infinitely greater. And that, Christian, continues to be the great hope for those who choose justice. What truth is God asking you to speak today, even if it is uncomfortable? What injustice is he calling you to confront? Are you willing to be a voice for righteousness, even if it means standing against the current? The choice, as always, is yours. What will you do with the echo of Amos?